What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the pod, the channel. Sorry for missing out last week. Raza carried, as he always does.
Yes,
What
sir.
is up? Um, had a crazy week 12. We saw last week in Raza's pod in terms of some of the rankings and um, nearing the end of the year, it's becoming more and more important. All of us are definitely striving for this bad boy right here. Um, but yeah, we have an interesting pod for you guys today. Of course, your regular like matchup of the week, studs and duds, and then we'll kind of dive deeper into our league and some of the standings and some of the stipulations in terms of winning and losing in the next couple of weeks. So, Rosa, you can take it away.
All right. Just start us off. Let's go into our matchup of the week. This was actually a really good week in terms of scoring fantasy points. I don't think there was anyone that
Mhm.
really scored very little points. I think the lowest scorer this week was Bass without the B, ninth place, which is Farhan Himati.
Which
Actually,
one?
no, sorry. It was Amar by 0.16 points. But
Ooh,
anyways, besides that, our matchup of the week this week is none other than our co-host Wajih and Abbas Zedi. This was a really close matchup. It's actually surprising because Waji is actually sitting not. You'd expect him to be like basically within playoffs, like he's about to clinch. But this was a must-win game for him, and obviously the same case for Abbas, who's now sitting at fifth place. It was a 135 to 139 matchup. Waji ended up pulling out a pretty good win. I remember in the beginning of the week when Stefan Diggs was playing, he was tilting about the performance of Diggs, and he kind of came up in the clutch. I wish Abbas could say the same thing about Christian McCaffrey, but unfortunately he had a bad game and did sustain an injury. So
yeah.
maybe interesting to see what we think about waivers. I don't know. Maybe Waji would have something to think about that. But yeah, it was a pretty good matchup. I think this was the closest one, and Waji sitting at second. He's sitting pretty, and let's see what happens. Moving on, let's start talking about what Waji mentioned earlier. Actually, switching over the board here, we got our matchups. Sorry, the standings, I should say. Sitting here, we have all their different teams. I'm really shocked. I'm just gonna mention it straight up, Waji. I started the league 0-4, and somehow I'm sitting here at
Okay.
7-5 with four
Props.
wins in a row. I'm feeling pretty good. What do you think about these standings?
Dude, these standings are like it's so insane how one, two, three, four people are tied for 7 and 5. I think kind of just the topic of what you mentioned, you and your team. I think probably the biggest matchup that I see in my eyes is you versus Amar. Like you guys, you two are essentially fighting for that playoff spot. Of course, we have one more week after this, but it's it's that matchup that I'm like kind of biting my nails on because your team's red hot. Your team is getting healthier. You're getting Jamar back. But I mean, Amar's team is looking good too. So he has Pat Mahomes. He has AJ Brown, who didn't have a great week. I don't know if I remember correctly, but he still has like studs in his
Waddle
lineup
as
as
well.
well.
Waddle's looking
Waddle
good.
too.
Yeah.
If Mike Evans can perform, like he's kind of like a boomer bust as well. So hopefully it's a boom week for him. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of the matchup of the week.
Yeah. Looking at these standings, another person I want to commend is Daniel. Like,
True.
he was also having a pretty bad season, and he started picking it back up with making some good trades. I think he made couple of good ones with Sumi as well, which kind of catapulting his team upwards. Getting Godwin was also a good thing.
Yeah, that's true.
I wanted to get your opinion on this. Looking at the standings, right? I think it's pretty safe to assume that Ali, our third lowest scorer, is probably going to be making it into the playoffs. If you had to pick I know for a fact it's probably going to be, since you're the highest scorer, you're more than likely got that second spot. Who do you think makes it into that third and fourth? Because I mean, there's a three-way tie between me, Amar, and Abbas, and then you have Salik and Daniel biting at our heels, waiting for us to lose. So, what do you think, and how you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a toss-up between you and Amar, like I was mentioning, for one of those spots. I don't think like this will be the top four going into playoffs. I think either one of Salik or Daniel's team will catapult to that number four spot, just because again, um, Daniel's team is red hot, but also Salih's team. Like he has some studs. However, DeAndre Hopkins is on a bye this week,
Ooh, that's a big
which
one.
is very costly. That's like an automatic 20 points for you every week. So that will be very tough to recover from. But he has like studs all around in terms of running backs, tight end, quarterback, wide receiver. So it'll be interesting to see who solidifies that. I would place my bets on this being maybe top four, but place my bets on you and Amar fighting for that one position, and then the person who loses from your matchup kind of missing playoffs and someone else getting the bump.
Yeah,
What about you?
yeah. I mean, my biggest worry personally, I think right now is probably Daniel and Salik.
Yeah,
I'd say a little more towards Daniel right now because just looking at his team, he's also on that huge win streak, and when you think about fantasy, you usually don't think winning streaks matter because like there's no correlation between the people you have on your team in
exactly.
comparison to what's actually going on in real football. But like somehow it actually works that way. Like if you're on a win streak, you're making good decisions and like you're doing a lot of good things right, which are catapulting you to like some big wins. Um, Moving away from top four, let's talk about like the bottom of the list. You yourself being someone that's come in last place a few times and having a
Yeah.
punishment. Okay, and one thing to get straight, we still have all of our punishments to do, and
Yep.
don't think we're forgetting because we're not gonna forget. We have to keep it going. If Wajji did his, everyone has to do theirs.
Yeah.
But yeah,
100%.
just bringing us to the last place conversation. I know you wanted to talk about this, so I just wanted to get your opinion. You see Ali Rizvi, bumping his way down. You have Farhan,
Yeah.
some of you fighting for 9th and 10th place. What are you thinking about the bottom down over there?
Dude, honestly, I think Ali Rizvi, if you're watching right now, you're big chillin'. I'm sorry you have to kind of hang up the sneaks for this season because you're not going to make playoffs. I'm sorry. And you probably aren't going to be last place. So you can just chill. However, I would say still set your lineup and everything because it is important for the rest of the league. However, with Farhan and Sadik, they're just fighting for that number nine
Sami,
spot.
Farhan and Sami.
Farhan and Sami, sorry.
No worries.
Fighting for that number nine spot. I think Ali Zaidi, who is number one, still needs to be on his A game against Sami, who is 10th right now, because Sami doesn't want to be 10th, of course. Who wants to be last? And if Ali Zaidi loses this week, that will be crazy in terms of the rankings. And, whoever wins this week, there's so many people that are 7-5. I may catapult to one. You may catapult to one from last to one. Imagine that story. So it'll be interesting to see, how it plays out in terms of Farhan and Sami.
Yeah, bro. It's an interesting dynamic. If if we have Sami finishing last, and you finish first, I definitely think you got to give him a pat on the back and let it go for his punishment after the trades he's made with you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with you, man. It's gonna be a fight for last. Let's see like what happens. I think Farhan. If I had to pick a better team, I'm gonna say Farhan's team is a little better. But
yeah,
I think Sami has a chance to get himself out of that last place because he's only back one game. And he's also has relatively the same amount of points scored, actually a little more than Farhan. So let's see. It'd be pretty fun to see one of the Himiti bros having another punishment.
yeah,
Um,
bro. Scary hours for sure.
yeah. Yeah, we could move on then. Move on to the studs and duds. I guess I'll start us off then. Um,
Cool.
so for this week for studs, I wanted to highlight, like I mentioned earlier, none of the teams for our fantasy teams, I should say, had a bad game. Everyone was scoring at least 120 points. We didn't have anyone scoring super low like we've had in the past week, so we're close to like 100 points, which means there was good fantasy output from most players. Some people I wanted to highlight. There was some really good quarterback play this past week.
Mhm.
One person I wanted to bring up is someone on my team, Justin Herbert. He finally had a good game. I know he's been in a slump recently. He finally got his guy Keenan Allen back, which
Yes, sir.
catapulted him to 274 yards and 3 touchdowns. Another person I wanted to highlight, we had this conversation like at the beginning of the year, and one of my big takes was like Trevor Lawrence would be a top 10 quarterback in fantasy. guess where he's at right now in terms of fantasy overall quarterback.
If I had to guess, like maybe like 11 or 12.
QB9, bro. He's sitting at
Nine. No
QB9.
way.
He's
That's
getting better.
crazy.
He's getting better and better every week. I mean, I bet
Yeah.
Wajih could probably attest to this. Like probably watching some of the games. He had a really
Yeah.
good game against the Ravens. He put up a stat line of 321 yards and 3 touchdowns. I think he's getting better and better, and he's improving. You know, I wonder, Wajih, like, what do you think of that take that I had, and like, what are you thinking of Trevor Lawrence so far, or like how he's improved?
Yeah. I think like you kind of hit the nail on the head. He just keeps on getting better and better. Do you remember the coach for the Jaguars? Is it Doug Peterson?
Yeah, right now it's Doug Peterson. Yeah.
Right now, it's Doug Peterson. Okay, I'm surprised that Doug Peterson is doing well with a quarterback. Like he doesn't develop quarterbacks amazingly in the past, but I mean, I guess he has weapons around him like Christian Kirk and Travis Etienne, and you saw J. Michael Hasty even. So I feel like the scheme is working for Trevor Lawrence, and it's very similar to what he ran in college, like out of the shotgun, a lot of plays. So I think that's why we see the huge jump from year one to year two, like being successful because Doug Peterson is implementing that college style. So it's cool to see that Trevor Lawrence is like doing very well. Um, I think running back usage was very much so a theme of this week. Of course, quarterbacks did well, but quarterbacks did well because of their running backs.
For sure.
And I think kind of staying in your team, a player that went off for you was Miles Sanders. He had 143 rush yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground, and then a couple of receiving, or catches as well. And I feel like that was an explosion game. Miles Sanders has very much so been like a floor of like what 5 to 10 maybe, and then he has those boom games of like 20 plus. But he had 33, I believe, this week. So that was a massive game. I think like that definitely helps you in terms of like playoffs and all that. And we just hope that he can continue that success. But in terms of like a fantasy manager, that's kind of hard on you because it's like, okay, he has those boom games, but he can also deliver a dud for me.
Yeah.
So very
One,
interesting
one
situation.
person I wanted to commend as well, like if you're talking about rushing, bro. I think it's worth mentioning Jalen Hurts and like the performance he also put on,
Mm,
dude. This man had 100
yeah,
yards rushing in the first quarter against the Packers,
yeah,
bro. Now,
wow.
as a Packers fan, that sucked for me, but dude, he went off for fantasy purposes. So I just feel like that was
Yeah,
worth mentioning. Yeah.
I think that's definitely like a really good point that you mentioned because Packers are like shoot, like the quarterback is literally another running back, so we can't load the box, and then you hand it off to Miles Sanders, and then he gushes in the middle for 15 yards. So that rushing dynamic is really hard to stop. I think another person that was a beast in terms of rushing. I don't think I've seen this stat line in a long time, but 229 rush yards and 2 touchdowns from Josh Jacobs. Good God.
Man's
like
an animal.
I think he did come out kind of injured or with a calf injury, but man, like he just carried the load for the Raiders. And he also had 74 receiving yards. So he's definitely like workhorse territory. Josh McDaniels is using him amazingly. Honestly, going into the year, I kind of want to get your take on this. Like going into the year, I mean, everyone was down on Josh Jacobs, and like now he's performing. And like maybe, I mean, I didn't do any research, but in the back of my head, I was like, oh, Raiders have an awful offensive line, so I don't want to even draft Josh Jacobs. Like, what's been your take on like Josh Jacobs this season?
I think the analysts really did a number on Josh Jacobs, especially because people saw the fact that they have a brand new coach coming in, brand new scheme. They also didn't pick up his 5th year option. There are like
Yeah, true.
there's so much negativity around the Raiders in terms of those aspects. Like if there's a lot of new stuff, it usually affects the running backs first. So I understand why people
That's
are
fair.
moving
Yeah.
away from Jacobs, but like he's proven it in the league like already that he's very capable, he's very good. One person I can think of that went in the same round as Josh Jacobs is like Cam Akers. So I could definitely understand someone like Salik thinking back like, God damn it, if I took freaking Josh Jacobs instead of Cam Akers in the same round,
Yeah.
how good it would have been. But yeah, he's proven it for the past few years now. He kind of does fizzle out sometimes, but like this year, he has something to prove too. So he has a fire under his butt, and he's just trying to get that next
Yeah. I love
contract
that,
too,
bro.
and he's proven it.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I think it's been very cool to see like Josh Jacobs like do well in that instance. Um, I guess like a moving on to like duds. What's kind of a running back that you felt didn't do so well this week? Because you mentioned it was great for fantasy, but there was a lot of people that didn't do well as well.
Yeah. You know what I'm starting to think? I think this is one of those years, like generations past, where one generation of superstar running backs is starting to fall off while the new generation's coming in. Like the new
Interesting.
generation being Kenneth Walker, Travis Etienne,
Yeah.
Brees Hall, like all these young guys, and then you have like people like Leonard Fournette, Alvin Kamara, McCaffrey. They're getting older and they're starting to slow down a little bit. So the dud I wanted to
Yeah.
talk about was Alvin Kamara. You know, in years
Yikes.
past, he's been freaking amazing. Like he's
Yeah.
unstoppable, but against the 49ers defense, I got to give it to the Niners defense. I think they're definitely the number one. They managed to hold Kamara to 6 receptions on 37 yards and cost 2 fumbles, bro.
That's wild.
Both lost as well, I think, right?
Yeah. Lost. Yeah.
One of them on the 1 yard line. So I mean, he could have had an okay game. He was saved by the 6 receptions PPR. That's already 6 points. But I mean,
Yeah.
this is not what you've been expecting from Kamara, so it's interesting to see. I do think better days are ahead, but he's on the duds for this week.
Yeah. I think speaking about that Niners defense, like I think the game to watch this week is Miami Dolphins versus Niners
Ooh,
because
yeah,
like Niners haven't faced like a great team yet, and I feel Miami Dolphins is definitely a great team. And like Kyle Shanahan versus McDaniels, oof, that's gonna be something to watch.
is it here or is it in Miami?
It's in Miami,
Oh,
yeah.
that'll be
So
interesting.
even a bigger test for I would say for both teams. So let's see how it goes.
Let
I
I'm
would,
before you move on. I just wanted to mention real quick. I'm curious to see how Shanahan matches up with McDaniel, like
yeah, dude, that's a
schematically wise, right? Like, is
prodigy,
he gonna
bro.
know his number and he's gonna know what plays he's gonna call, like, or is it gonna be something else? Because like I think I remember in the NFC Championship against the Packers, there was a play where they had a camera on the sideline and Shanahan called an exact play the Packers were running right before it did, and they threw a flag because he's like, this guy's gonna hold my guy right
Yeah,
here,
George
Kittle.
Kittle. Yeah, yeah,
So I'm curious to see if something like that happens. I definitely agree, bro. This game is gonna be the game to watch this week. And
yeah.
if we had to make a decision on like game of the week, I'm calling it. I agree with you. I think this is gonna be the one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, bro. I want it to be high scoring, but I think it'll be a low scoring matchup. Just being like shots at each other and like very it's gonna be definitely chess instead of checkers. So let's
For
see.
sure. Yeah.
I think going into duds for myself, one big dud, sorry Amar, is Mike Evans. I mentioned kind of like boomer bust earlier on in the podcast. This man only had 2 receptions for 30 yards, which is not a lot of points, 5 points. Um, Again, I think better days are ahead, but Mike Evans definitely being that boomer bust is it's scary at the end of the season because you need him to pop off, but he can very much deliver a performance like this. So let's see what Amar does in terms of like managing his team and if he benches Mike Evans or he starts him. So
Yeah.
we'll figure that out.
Yeah. I think it's worth noting that he did have 9 targets. So I mean, watching that game, I don't know if you watched that game,
I
but
didn't know.
there were a lot of times where he was being overthrown, which was
I see.
insane to see. Especially because Brady's getting old. Like for
Yeah,
example, when Peyton Manning got old, he couldn't throw that far, but this man's somehow overthrowing his guys. But
yeah,
yeah, I do agree. He's boomer bust, but I think they probably have a better matchup coming this week. I can't remember exactly who they're playing, but um,
the
he's
Saints
oh
Monday night.
oh
Yeah,
never never mind. That's the team he always does bad against. It'll be
yeah,
interesting to see. He's an important factor in terms of our matchups and how the playoffs will actually play out in our league because I play
yeah,
against Amar. So I mean, it's gonna be a fun one to watch for sure.
yeah. That'll definitely be huge. All right, well, moving on to Shaqtin. Drum roll, please. I feel like it hits home to what I just talked about. And Amar's team. I'm sorry, Amar, you are Shaqtin for this week. Um, just losing by 12 points was kind of a heartbreaker for you, I know. If you didn't start Mike Evans, the man that we just mentioned, and or maybe even benching Juju and starting like AJ Dillon, or I think there was someone else on your bench that did okay as well, you would have gotten the dub. But again, I think you have a very much so better days ahead. You probably have the hardest matchup of the whole year against Raza this week. So let's see if you can bounce back. Honestly, this is probably one of the biggest weeks of the whole year, and then next week will be even bigger than that. So exciting times ahead, and I'm super excited to see how the rankings shape out and who ends up in playoffs and who ends up on top. So
I
best of
think
luck, everyone.
I just want to mention. I think it's important to note if he had won that game, he'd be sitting at number one, and he probably wouldn't even
Yeah,
be worried about playoffs at all. But like,
exactly.
just one game, man. This is how competitive our league is, and you're Shaqtin
Wow,
as
man.
well as you're fighting for playoffs.
That's wild, bro. Amar, let that sink in that if Mike Evans wasn't a bum, you would be number one. But anyways, thank you for joining us for another week on the pod. We will catch you guys later. Hopefully, maybe have a guest host next week. So stay tuned for that.